Jim Fox was a dedicated family man, working hard to provide for his wife Helen and their daughter Emily in Pennsylvania. He had been steadily advancing at his company, and their life seemed stable and mutually respectful. Although their marriage had its challenges, Jim believed their bond was strong. However, Helen had grown restless, secretly longing for excitement. Over time, Helen's dissatisfaction deepened, leading her to seek attention outside their marriage. Jim, focused on his career and daughter, remained unaware of Helen's feelings, trusting their relationship completely. The eventual discovery of her betrayal was a crushing blow. One morning, Jim woke up feeling uneasy after a restless night. He had seen Emily's boyfriend with another girl at the mall, and they were kissing. Jim knew telling Emily would hurt her, especially with a crucial volleyball match approaching, so he decided to wait until after the game. Later, Jim was called into a meeting with his boss and introduced to Ralph Jenkins, the previous owner of a newly acquired plant in Daytona Beach. Jim was offered a promotion to oversee the maintenance team there, along with a 25% pay raise and a rent-free apartment for a year. Without hesitation, Jim accepted, thinking his wife would welcome the move to warmer weather. After the meeting, Jim drove Ralph to the airport and began feeling optimistic. Emily could finish her last semester in Daytona and leave her boyfriend behind. But as Jim left the airport, he spotted a red Camry with a visible radiator parked at a nearby motel. It matched the description of Helen's car, which had recently been damaged. His heart raced as he parked nearby, suspecting the worst. Jim, in a company car Helen didn't recognize, decided to wait and see who was with her. Realizing he needed more information, he cut the valve stem on her spare tire, knowing she would call him for help if she had a flat. Then he waited, tense and anxious, to see what would happen next. Half an hour later, Jim heard a curse at his car window, which he lowered slightly. "Damn it, what do I do now?" Helen muttered. "No problem, sexy lady. After a meal like that, I'm happy to help," her companion replied as Jim's world crumbled. "I don't have a spare tire. My husband didn't put the wheel back in the car after fixing it," Helen complained. "What an idiot," her lover chuckled. "I always make sure my wife's car is in top shape. I shouldn't have come with you today. What now?" "Let's go back to our room while I call for help," Helen suggested, and they headed back to the motel. Jim waited for her call, planning how to respond, but his phone never rang. 20 minutes later, Jim's heart sank further as he saw Emily's Honda Civic pull into the parking lot. She walked to the motel, knocked on the door, and after a minute brought a tire from her trunk as Helen and her lover approached. "Frank, pay for this so Emily can play tonight. She needs to stay focused," Helen said. "Thanks, Mom. If you cared, you'd have dressed before I arrived. I need to get to school and prepare. Can you handle it from here?" Emily asked, clearly upset. "No problem, Em," Frank replied. "I'll get dropped off at Home Depot, and I'll be at your game tonight." "Thanks, Frank. Just don't sit too close to Mom. Dad will be there, and I don't want any drama." "Don't worry, I won't cause trouble," Frank laughed. "Your dad won't even notice what's going on." "Frank, don't talk about Jim like that. He's my husband and Emily's father. He deserves respect," Helen interjected. Emily shot back. "Respect? After what you're doing? I just want to finish school and get out of this mess." "I told you, I love your father and there won't be a divorce. We'll grow old together," Helen insisted. "You're delusional. Dad won't tolerate this forever, and Frank isn't worth it." "You're just using each other while you can," Emily retorted. "Dad has put just as much effort into this marriage." "Your father? He's not like that. He's a good husband and father," Helen laughed. Emily nodded toward Frank. "Frank's a good guy, huh? Yet he's cheating on his wife with you. If he cared about his family, he wouldn't be here." "Enough, Emily. This isn't up for debate. Get to school and focus. Frank and I will be at your game." "Doesn't make me feel any better," Emily muttered. "Just keep him away from Dad. Frank may underestimate him, but Dad's not a pushover." Emily drove off, leaving Helen and Frank alone as he tightened the tire. "She's not too thrilled about us, is she? My daughter would react the same way. That's why I keep this hidden from her and my wife." "Emily knows what's happening and is keeping quiet to avoid a divorce," Helen reassured him. Jim sat in the back seat of the company car, disoriented long after Helen had driven away. Discovering her affair was painful, but learning that Emily knew and accepted it devastated him. He remembered Emily's volleyball match was about to start, and for the first time in her high school career, he would miss it. Feeling too upset to face his family, he returned home, had a few beers, and contemplated his future. The realization that Helen might not want to move to Daytona because of her lover hit him hard. He reflected bitterly on how faithful he had been, and how she had taken advantage of that trust. Jim realized Helen didn't know about the Florida relocation and would assume he was going to Michigan. He thought about moving to Florida alone, giving himself time to sort out his family issues while she stayed in Pennsylvania with Frank. The idea appealed to him as a small act of revenge. With the weekend and upcoming week to plan, Jim decided to leave for Daytona after Thanksgiving. His wife and daughter would think he was headed to Michigan, giving him space and a break from them. After taking some Dramamine and another beer, Jim prepared to sleep in the guest room. He moved his clothes and toiletries, then locked the door and tried to sleep, though worry kept him awake for a while. Emily noticed her father's truck in the garage and wondered why he hadn't come to her game. Helen, surprised by the empty beer cans, went to check on him but couldn't find him in the usual places. They eventually found Jim asleep in the guest room, unresponsive to their attempts to wake him. He must have been drinking, Emily guessed, puzzled by his behavior and his absence at her game. "We'll ask him in the morning," Helen suggested, noting that he sometimes slept elsewhere to avoid spreading illness. She urged Emily not to be too hard on him. Helen mentioned that Frank thought Emily played well and could get a scholarship, which irritated Emily. "I don't care what Frank thinks," Emily snapped. "He's a cheating idiot, and I'd be happy never to see him again." "Why can't you be happy for me?" Helen complained. "Frank makes me feel young and attractive." "I'm worried about Dad. If he finds out about Frank, it'll break his heart," Emily replied. "That's why he can't find out," Helen said. "I give your father all the love he needs. Frank just gives me something extra." "Keep telling yourself that, Mom," Emily said. "But if you keep this up, Dad will find out, even if it's not from me." "He won't suspect anything if you don't tell him," Helen insisted. "Your father completely trusts me." At 5 a.m., Jim woke up, quietly dressed, and left the house. After finishing breakfast at IHOP, his phone rang. "Jim, are you okay?" Helen asked, worried. "You missed Emily's match last night, and this isn't like you." "I just decided to be unpredictable," Jim replied before hanging up and turning off his phone. Jim spent the morning packing his tools and belongings into his truck, preparing for his move. As the day went on, he became more confident about his decision to start fresh in Florida. He knew he had to keep his plans secret until after Thanksgiving, so Helen and Emily would think he was heading to a colder location. Late in the afternoon, Jim returned home. Helen angrily confronted him for missing Emily's match and acting out of character. 2 days ago, he might have felt guilty, but now her anger meant nothing to him. He simply nodded and left the house, heading to a sports pub for dinner. To his surprise, Jim found he could still enjoy himself. After a few drinks and some sports talk with the other patrons, he returned home around 11 p.m. Helen and Emily were watching a movie. Helen sarcastically remarked on his absence and demanded an apology. "Okay," Jim muttered, grabbing his clothes for the next day and moving to the guest room. As Jim left, Emily noticed, "He doesn't seem to care that you're upset. It's like he enjoys sleeping in the guest room." "You don't know your father," Helen grinned. "He won't last 2 nights before coming back to my bed." "Maybe," Emily replied skeptically, "but I hope he doesn't find out about Frank." "Stop mentioning his name," Helen insisted. "I want to keep this a secret." Emily retorted, "If he's not ready for his wife, maybe you should be the one to raise him." Helen was taken aback by her daughter's bluntness. Emily had agreed to keep Frank a secret to avoid her parents' divorce, but her disrespect was growing. Helen struggled to balance being a good mother and lover, knowing her daughter was aware of her affair. Helen also wondered what had changed in Jim over the past 2 days. He was acting differently, and she wasn't going to tolerate it. But she was confident he'd come around. The Zex they had was too good for him to stay away for long. Jim woke early again on Sunday, had breakfast at IHOP, and took a long walk in the park, enjoying the cool November morning. He appreciated the fresh air, knowing he wouldn't have to deal with the cold once he moved to Florida. He returned home before noon with a 6-pack, turned on the TV, and settled in to watch the Eagles game. Helen ignored him for an hour before angrily leaving the house. Helen returned home around 6:30, and by 7 o'clock, the second batch was finished. When Jim noticed there was no dinner, he turned off the TV and left. He ended up at a local sports pub, enjoying ribs and football. The Eagles had beaten the Giants, and Jim was in a good mood, looking forward to Thanksgiving Day when they'd play the Cowboys. "Dad's been acting strange lately, don't you think?" Emily asked her mother. "He usually watches the game on Sundays. Did you two fight?" "We barely spoke," Helen replied. "I told him he needed to apologize for missing your match and drinking too much before he could sleep in my bed again. I also told him I wouldn't cook for him until his attitude changed. He'll miss my cooking and love, and He'll apologize soon. When Jim got home, the football game had become one-sided, so he left the bar early. He walked past Helen and Emily and went straight to the guest room. Helen felt a tension she hadn't expected. Over the next 3 days, Jim stayed silent, showing no intention of apologizing. His defiance unsettled her. On Tuesday, Helen met Frank at the motel and had another flat tire, making her suspect the flats weren't a coincidence. She decided not to return to the motel again. Fortunately, she had the spare tire fixed on Monday, and Frank replaced it. Meanwhile, Jim spent Monday packing his belongings, preparing for his move. He carefully arranged his clothes to make it look like he hadn't packed much, wondering if Helen would notice he didn't take any cold weather gear. On Monday and Tuesday afternoons, Jim waited at Home Depot for his wife to leave work. On Monday, she went grocery shopping afterwards, so Jim parked at his new favorite bar for dinner and Monday night football. "Is Dad coming home today?" Emily asked her mother. "Who knows?" Helen sighed. "He's not talking to me and is still sleeping in the guest room. I don't know what's gotten into him." "Could he have found out what's going on?" Emily asked. "You told him he couldn't sleep with you and wouldn't cook for him, so why would he come home? Maybe you should forgive him and cook him a nice meal." "Tomorrow night I can't. I'm meeting Frank. You'll have to eat leftovers. I'll be home later." "You're prioritizing Frank over Dad," Emily pointed out. "Frank's winning this game." "At least Frank treats me with respect and doesn't get drunk or hang up on me," Helen retorted. "Does he take out the trash, mow the lawn, paint the house, or pay our bills?" Emily asked pointedly. "Of course not," Helen snapped. "Frank just gets into bed with you," Emily responded. "Dad does all the hard work, and you think Frank's the best because he flatters you. You expect so much from Dad, but give what he deserves to Frank. That's not fair." Helen, angered, said, "I'm your mother. Show some respect." "And Dad expects your respect and loyalty, but he's not getting it," Emily argued. "Respect has to be earned, not demanded." That evening, Emily stopped Jim as he walked through the living room. "Our district championship game is tomorrow at 4. Can you make it?" "I'll check my schedule," Jim replied vaguely before heading upstairs. "I think he's mad at me too," Emily said. "I haven't done anything, but he doesn't seem to care. He's in a weird mood." Helen tried to comfort her. "He's upset about something but doesn't know how to express it. He'll come to your game tomorrow. Look, his truck is in the garage." The next evening, when Jim didn't show up at her match, Emily was in tears. "He didn't want to come. Why is he mad at me?" "That's a good question," Helen said sadly. "Let's find out what's going on." Helen returned home around 6:30, and by 7 o'clock, another empty six-pack was on the counter, with no sign of Jim. "It's only 8 o'clock, Helen said, worried. "He can't already be in bed." Once again, they found Jim in a deep sleep in the guest room, unable to wake him. Frustrated, they retreated to the living room. "Tomorrow's Thanksgiving. Will you let Dad eat with us?" Emily asked. "Of course," Helen replied. "His parents and mine will be here. This is his home and I won't keep him away. Hopefully he'll be in a better mood by then. I invited everyone for 4. "Who did you invite, Mom? Please tell me it's not Frank." "Frank and his wife are coming. I think he and Jim will get along. They both like football and hunting," Helen reasoned. "But one of the things they share is you," Emily pointed out. "This is a terrible idea." "I just think they'll get along. Jim needs more friends," Helen insisted. "You're out of your mind. This won't end well," Emily argued. "We'll see," Helen replied confidently. Jim woke early on Thanksgiving and went to a small cafe for breakfast. He returned home around 9 a.m., greeted by the smells of turkey and pie. "Dinner's at noon," Helen announced. "Our folks will be here soon. Want something to drink?" Jim shook his head, sat in the living room, and turned on the TV, uninterested in Helen's attempts at peace. He greeted her parents politely when they arrived, as well as his own parents a few minutes later. During dinner, Jim made an announcement. "I'm being transferred to another plant. I leave tomorrow, and it could last until spring or longer." Helen was shocked. Why hadn't he mentioned this before? She knew she wouldn't want to move to Michigan, and this might explain his recent behavior. "This is surprising," Helen's mother commented. Helen didn't mention it. "Will she join you?" "I'll go alone," Jim replied. "It wouldn't be fair to make Emily change schools or for Helen to leave her job. I'll manage on my own for a few months." The grandparents started discussing Michigan's weather, while Helen and Emily exchanged concerned glances, thinking Jim was upset about leaving his family. After dinner, Jim, his father, and Helen's father watched the Eagles game. Disappointed by their team's poor performance, They were half watching the pregame show for the next game when the doorbell rang. Jim didn't pay attention until Helen introduced a couple in the hallway. "This is Nancy and her husband Frank," she said, naming everyone in the room, with Jim last. Frank, grinning, walked up to Jim wearing a Dallas Cowboys sweater. "Hello, Jimmy. I've heard a lot about you," Frank said, extending his hand. Jim, who had held everything in, snapped. Without warning, he kicked Frank hard between the legs, then kneed him in the face, knocking him to the floor with a broken nose. Everyone froze in shock. Nancy screamed and rushed to Frank, while Helen vomited in the bathroom and Emily grabbed ice and a washcloth to help. Stunned by his own actions, Jim grabbed his coat and left the house. He drove south on Highway 81, stopping only when he reached Hillsville, Virginia, where he rented a room and quickly fell asleep. The next morning, Jim turned on his phone to find it full of messages, which didn't surprise him. After listening to a few, he deleted them all. Ignoring the calls from his mother, Helen, and Emily demanding to know where he was, Jim decided to stick to his plan and continued driving south on Highway 77. As Jim drove, he kept replaying the previous day's events. Frank had it coming, but what would the consequences be? Would he get arrested, lose his job before reaching Daytona, or face divorce? Realizing he needed to check his messages to understand the situation, he decided to leave his phone on but not answer calls, checking messages after the caller hung up. Helen called within 30 minutes. After waiting a bit, Jim read her text. "Jim, call me. I know the transfer has shaken you, but you need to pull yourself together. Frank's nose needs surgery, but he won't press charges. Please call me." Jim drove all day and arrived at his new apartment at 5 p.m. He retrieved the key from a safe outside, unpacked, parked the truck in the garage, and went to bed by 7 o'clock. With 2 days off before starting his new job, Jim noticed some issues with the apartment and planned to fix them on Saturday. Concerned Helen might find out about the Daytona plant and try to join him, he decided to call her on Saturday morning. "Hello?" "Hi, Helen. It's Jim. Where the hell are you? We called all night, but your phone was off. What's wrong with you? Frank ended up with a broken nose and a concussion just for rooting for a different football team. Are you crazy?" Jim ended the call, turned off his phone, and made a list of items to buy. An hour later, he returned with a new door lock, air filter, cleaning supplies, and a 30-pack of beer. At noon, he called Emily. "Hi, Dad. Glad you called after your fight with Frank. An ambulance took him to the hospital, and everyone was worried you were losing it. Mom was scared they'd sue us. I had to clean up the blood while Mom took Nancy to the hospital. Anything else happen?" "No, pretty quiet," Jim replied. "Just one more thing. Mom's upset you hung up on her again." "Yeah, I could tell," Jim admitted. "I called to let you know I got a new job and start Monday, in case the police ask where I am." "Don't worry," Emily reassured him. "Frank didn't press charges, though I think his wife wanted him to. The cops won't come looking for you." "But why the secrecy about your transfer? Is that why you've been acting weird?" "The transfer made me rethink my life. I realized I need to respect myself to be respected. I've lost my way over the years, but I'm getting back on track." "Are you okay, Dad? Any health issues?" Emily asked, concerned. "Not exactly. You and your mom know what's going on," Jim said sadly. "Just tell her I'm fine and not to worry." "Okay, Dad. I'll call you sometimes. Will you answer?" Jim struggled with his anger toward his daughter. He loved her, but her disregard hurt. He didn't want her out of his life, even though he was still upset about the betrayal. "If you don't call while I'm working, I'll answer," he replied after a pause. "What about Mom? Can she call?" Emily insisted. "Will you answer?" "If she wants to call just to tell me off, she shouldn't bother," Jim responded quickly. "But if there's an issue with the house or family, she should call. That's fair, right?" "I'll tell her. Good luck with your new job and stay warm. Is it cold there now?" "It's better than I expected. Don't worry about the weather. I'll be fine. Goodbye." As soon as Emily put down the phone, Helen started asking questions. "What did he say? Did he apologize? Is he afraid to come home? What did he say about me?" "He doesn't seem scared at all," Emily replied. "He said no one would respect him unless he respected himself. That's why he cut Frank off and keeps hanging up on you. If you want to talk to him, you'll need to show more respect. He's the one who attacked a guest in our home over a t-shirt and keeps hanging up. Next time we talk, I'm telling him exactly what I think," Helen vowed. "That's exactly why he's hanging up. He won't listen to you if you're disrespectful. Frank is the only one benefiting from this unless you find more boyfriends," Emily retorted. "Why do you keep making these rude comments?" Helen asked. "Because you've been rude and disrespectful. Frank laughed at Dad, not just because the Cowboys beat the Eagles, but because he slept with Dad's wife. That's enough to drive anyone crazy, but Dad doesn't know, Frank was hinting. Helen disagreed. He knew Frank was being an idiot, so he put him in his place. You don't disrespect someone in their own home. Any man would be angry, even if he didn't know his wife was cheating, Helen argued. I'm done with this talk. You live under my roof, and you will show me respect. On Wednesday evening, Jim was by the pool when his phone rang. He saw it was Helen and let it go to voicemail. Later, he checked the message. Jim, I know you're screening my calls. Please call me back. We need to make decisions about the house. Who'll shovel the driveway? Should we sign a fuel oil delivery contract? Which company to use? Please call. Hearing no hostility, Jim decided to call Helen back. She had important questions, and he didn't want her or Emily to face any issues. Thanks for calling, Jim, Helen said calmly. I'm worried about the things you usually handle around the house. Now that it's snowing, what should I do? I'll make a list and email it to you, Jim promised. I should have thought of that. Helen then asked, Are you coming home for Christmas? Mom and Dad invited us for dinner, and your parents want to see us on Christmas Eve. It's awkward telling them you're not responding to their calls. I don't know my schedule yet. If possible, I'll come home. You can tell them that. But they need to be polite if they want me to answer their calls. Every message I get, even from my mom, is hostile, and I don't need that, Jim insisted. I'll tell them, but I'm not sure it'll help. They weren't happy about how you treated Frank or that you left afterward, Helen replied cautiously. So there's no point in me coming for Christmas, is there? I'm not showing up just to be treated like the bad guy. If they want me there because they like my company, that's different, Jim said. You can still come home, Helen said, surprising Jim with tears in her voice. Emily and I would love to see you. We'll try not to make any dumb comments. Do you miss making love to me? Jim didn't want to be physical engaged with Helen anymore after hearing her with Frank. But he replied carefully, I've always enjoyed making love. Every time was special to me. He didn't mention that it was because he didn't realize he was getting Frank's leftovers. I agree, Helen cried. You're the best lover in the world, and I miss you. Please come home for Christmas. Let's see if you can join us for the week. I'll check. They don't usually give time off on short notice, especially that week, but I'll let you know, Jim promised. I'll also email you the list of things to handle for winter. Helen smiled after hanging up. Is he really the world's best lover? Emily asked. Frank might not like hearing that. He thinks he's number one. I've told you to be careful when talking about Frank. Your father is actually better than Frank, so that wasn't a lie. Frank is more fun, but not better. When Frank hears that, he'll be pleased. His wife thinks he's better than her other boyfriends. What husband wouldn't be proud of that? Emily noticed her mother leaving the room in tears. Jim enjoyed his new life, swimming daily, getting more tanned, and feeling comfortable. He was confident in his ability to manage the plant's equipment. What surprised him was the number of single women, widows, and divorcees in his condo, all of whom seemed to enjoy his company. Once they learned he could fix things, he was constantly in demand. This didn't bother him, as the women often thanked him with baked goods, meals, or leaving wine or beer at his door. A few days before Christmas, Helen urged Jim to come home for the holidays. After fixing a closet door for Mrs. Struthers, he turned around to find her unclothed. Jim, I don't have much money, but I have needs. Will you make love to me? She asked. Jim hesitated. He had never cheated on his wife and had only ever been with her. Susan was attractive, but he needed to figure out his marriage first. I need to sort out my marriage. After Christmas, I'll know more. I've never cheated, but that might change soon. I'll let you know. I understand, Susan said, covering herself. If you end things with your wife, you'll have plenty of women here ready to console you. Jim called Helen to say he'd try to be home for Christmas Eve. He was surprised by how happy she sounded. Knowing he missed both Helen and Emily, he decided to head north. He planned to drive halfway on the first day, shop on the second, and arrive home before Christmas Eve. When Jim reached his street at 9 a.m., he saw several cars parked in his driveway, recognizing a few. Helen was hosting her usual holiday gathering for her Home Depot friends. As he approached the door, he saw Frank in the kitchen. Anger flared, but Jim didn't want to ruin the holiday mood. He decided to enter through the basement and wait until Frank left. After dozing on an old sofa, Jim woke up 2 hours later. Hearing nothing from upstairs, he peeked outside and saw only one car left. Curious, he went to the front door and saw Helen and Frank in the kitchen. Frank kissed her and touched her bosom, reigniting Jim's anger. He resisted the urge to attack. knowing he couldn't get away with it again. Instead, he planned to sneak upstairs, take pictures, and then leave for Florida. Jim entered the house, climbed the stairs quietly, and hid in the guest room. He turned off the lights and waited. Helen eventually went to the master bedroom, and Jim heard the shower turn on. He guessed she was preparing for Frank. Jim turned off the hallway light and waited in the darkness, knowing Frank would be visible in the dim light from the street. When Frank was almost at the top of the stairs, Jim kicked him in the jaw, sending him tumbling down like a bobsledder. Frank landed at the bottom, motionless. The water was still running, and Helen hadn't heard anything. As Jim's anger faded, he realized that if Frank was dead, he was in serious trouble. Jim hurried down the stairs, stepped over Frank's body, and left the house. 2 hours later, he was already 100 miles away and decided to keep driving before stopping at a cheap motel just before dawn, paying in cash. After a 4-hour rest, he continued south, reflecting on his situation. He had attacked Frank, and depending on whether Frank survived, this could become serious. Jim realized he needed to stay away from both Frank and Helen to avoid ending up in prison. They weren't worth it. Despite everything, Jim admitted to himself that being without Helen made him feel lonely. She and Emily had been his world, but they betrayed him, and he knew he needed to move on. Around noon, his phone rang, but seeing it was his parents' number, he let it go to voicemail. He wasn't ready to explain why he missed Christmas Eve dinner or why he attacked Frank again. Half an hour later, Jim gathered the courage to listen to the message. "Jim, it's your father. Call us when you get this. Something serious happened at your house, but Helen and Emily are fine." Jim called back immediately. "What happened?" he asked when his father answered. "Son, it's Frank. He was at your house again last night. He fell down the stairs and was seriously injured. Broken jaw, arm, ribs, and another concussion. His wife found out he was with Helen and got there before the ambulance did. She was furious, tried to attack Helen, and even tried to throw Frank off the gurney. It was a mess." Jim's father continued. "After Thanksgiving, we thought you overreacted, but now we see why you did what you did. Your mother and I are proud of you. You showed more restraint than I would have." "Thanks, Dad," Jim replied, relieved. "How's Emily? Was she home during all this?" "That's another issue," his father said. "Emily had a serious talk with us this morning. She spent the night at a friend's, but she admitted she knew Helen was cheating. She wanted to keep the family together until she finished school, then planned to tell you. We're disappointed, but we all hugged it out." "Thanks for helping Emily through this," Jim said. "Son, where are you really? I know you said you were transferred, but it seems drastic to move to Michigan in December." "The company transferred me to Daytona Beach. I got a promotion, a big raise, and a small apartment. I'm the maintenance supervisor now," Jim explained. "That's great. Would you mind if your mom and I visit in February? We'll be sick of winter by then." "Anytime, Dad. Just don't tell Helen where I am. I don't want to deal with her now." "Understood, Jim. But you should talk to Emily. She's pretty down about all this. She thinks you knew about the affair because you've been so cold to them. Did you know she knew?" "I need to go, Dad. We'll talk more later. Thanks for your support. Love you both," Jim said, ending the call. Jim returned to his apartment at dusk on Christmas Eve, feeling depressed about spending his first Christmas alone. He turned on the TV, opened a beer, and sat on the couch to zone out. As he was deep in thought, the doorbell rang. "I saw your light and came to wish you a Merry Christmas," Susan Struthers said. "It's not good to be alone on Christmas. Your return tells me you haven't made peace with your wife." "That's a fair guess," Jim agreed. "Her boyfriend was going to sleep in my bed. I hate crowds unless it's a couple of women." "What about just one woman?" Susan asked, stepping closer. "I might make you move a bit, but I don't think you'll mind." Jim thought about Susan's offer before accepting. "I'd really like that. I should warn you, though. I haven't had sex in a long time, so I might not be very good. Otherwise, my wife wouldn't have looked elsewhere." "I doubt you're the problem," Susan replied. "A man as kind and thoughtful as you is bound to be great in bed. Do you have rubbers?" "No, I haven't used them in 20 years, Jim admitted, realizing he had a lot to learn about dating. "Your partners will appreciate it if you do. It's a smart, responsible choice," Susan assured him. Jim had a memorable Christmas Eve, and his anger toward Helen and Emily started to fade, replaced by happy memories that boosted his self-esteem. Though the pain from their betrayal lingered, he began to move on. Susan helped him see that life was still worth living. Susan left early Christmas morning to avoid gossip, but they agreed to meet at the pool later. That evening, they shared a home-cooked meal and more closeness. Jim returned to his apartment by 9 p.m. aware that others might have noticed his visits to Susan's place. A few minutes after he got home, his phone rang. "Dad, you didn't come home for Christmas. I don't blame you. Mom's a mess, and I feel awful too. I'm sorry for what we did. I knew it was wrong, but wanted you two to stay together until I finished school." "It's in the past," Jim said, "but I won't lie. You both hurt me deeply. I never knew your mom was so unhappy, and I didn't expect you to help her hide it. I'm trying to get through this, but it's tough." "The strange thing is, Mom's not unhappy with you. She says you're a good husband, father, and lover. She just wanted to try something different and regrets it now. Did you know about her and Frank on Thanksgiving?" "Yes, and I should have handled it better, but Frank pushed me too far with his disrespect." "I get it. I saw Frank's grin and knew he was gloating. Mom said it was about the Cowboys shirt, but I knew better. Did you miss my last 2 matches because you were upset with me?" "Yes, I'm sorry, but when Frank said he'd be there, I knew I couldn't go without causing a scene." "Did you hear Frank that day when I brought the spare tire? You cut the valve stem, didn't you? You wanted Mom to call you for help, but instead, I got involved." "I'm really sorry, Dad. I was selfish and stupid, and now I'm paying for it." "Don't blame yourself. I should have confronted your mother right then, but I was too angry. I might have done something I'd regret." "I doubt it, Dad. You're not the type to hurt Mom. But Frank's a different story. Grandpa told me Frank fell down our stairs last night. He's pretty banged up, but will recover. By the way, I found the laptop you left me for Thanksgiving in the basement. Thank you so much. I'll use it a lot, especially for college next year." "I'm glad you liked it," Jim said, realizing he'd forgotten about the gifts he left. "Did you find the one for your mother?" She cried when she saw the pearls. It made her feel even worse about how she treated you. "It's funny. I didn't see the gifts until a few days before Christmas when I was looking for new tree lights. Thank you for being such a good father. I'm starting to appreciate you more." "Don't be upset. When I was your age, I thought my parents were clueless, but they got a lot smarter over the years," Jim chuckled. "I just want you to be happy and live a good life. Don't worry about me." "I love you, Dad. Maybe I'll visit you this winter." "I didn't tell the whole truth about my transfer. The company moved me to Daytona Beach. I've got a small place here, and you're welcome to visit anytime. There's a pool outside, and the ocean's just a couple of blocks away." "Are you kidding? If Mom and I knew that, we would have gone with you. But I get it. We didn't deserve to be with you after all we did. I don't blame you for not telling us. We lied to you, so you had the right to keep something from us. This will really hit Mom hard. You don't have to tell her, but it's not a secret anymore. I'll email her my address so we can sort out the divorce without me having to go back." "I was afraid to ask. Are you divorcing Mom? I get it, and I don't blame you. I warned her about Frank, but she thought you'd never find out. I wish things had turned out differently. Good night, Dad. I'll try to visit." "Great. Good night, and Merry Christmas." Emily had just put her phone away when her mother entered the room. "Did I hear right that your father isn't in Michigan? Where is he, and why did he lie to us?" "He's at his company's new plant in Daytona Beach," Emily replied. "He didn't lie. He said he was being transferred. We just assumed it was Michigan. He didn't tell us because he was there when you called me to bring the spare tire to the motel. He heard everything and knew who you were with. He didn't feel obligated to consider us." "Why didn't he say anything then? Was he afraid of Frank?" Helen asked. "Afraid of Frank? Are you serious?" Emily shot back. "Dad wiped the floor with Frank. Frank's no match for him in a fight or in raising a family. You always try to find faults in Dad to justify your actions. You'd better not treat your next husband the way you treated Dad." "Next husband? What did your father tell you?" Helen asked, alarmed. "He's done with your lies and deception. He's considering divorce, just like I warned you he would. I don't want a divorce. I don't even like Frank. None of this would have happened if he hadn't fallen down the stairs," Helen whined. "Didn't you listen? You were doomed the day I brought you the spare tire at the motel. Dad was there, saw everything, and knew how much we disrespected him. He knows you lied, cheated, and by Thanksgiving, you were already a divorced woman in his eyes. Frank isn't to blame. You are. Maybe now that Frank's wife is divorcing him, you two can be together," Emily suggested. "I don't want Frank. I want Jim back," Helen sobbed. The next day was even worse for Helen. Emily called her father to explain the latest issue. "Mom got a letter from the health department. Frank has an STD, and now Mom has to get tested and inform everyone she's been with. You're on her list, and you'll get a letter soon." "Wow, I should have seen this coming. I'll make an appointment today. Thanks for telling me right away. I appreciate you looking out for me. I was lost for a while, but I'm back on track." Take care, Dad. Jim immediately arranged for a checkup and was relieved that Susan had been careful enough to prevent the spread of anything Helen might have passed on. On his way home, he bought a variety of rubbers and filled a bowl with them, placing it on his bedside table. He vowed never to risk spreading a preventable disease. As time passed, Jim got his test results and was pleased to learn he was healthy. His free time was filled with requests from the women in his condo to help with various tasks. He became more popular, and one evening Susan admitted she had mentioned his skills to a couple of women. Word spread, and Jim found himself regularly refilling his rubber bowl. The women who visited appreciated his concern for their health, which only enhanced his reputation. One afternoon before Easter, Jim was surprised when Emily showed up with a small suitcase. Before he could speak, she hugged him tightly. "I'm so sorry, Dad. Please forgive me and let me stay for a few days. I'll leave if you want." Jim, surprised but happy to see her, said, "You're always welcome here. Come on, I'll show you the room. You look all grown up." "I told you I finally filled out in all the right places," Emily laughed, turning so he could see. "I'm the same bra size as Mom now, though it probably fits me better. Mom's getting pretty thin. I hitched a ride with the Shears. They're headed to Orlando and dropped me off. I knew you'd let me stay. It's spring break, and I'll only be here for 4 days before heading back to the cold. This place is great. I guess you like living here." "It's smaller than our house, but it has everything I need, including a heated pool right outside," Jim said as Emily looked around. "Looks like you're getting everything you need," Emily laughed, spotting the dish of rubbers in his bedroom. "Good for you, Dad. You deserve some happiness after everything. I won't bother you. I'll just relax by the pool while you're at work. I haven't seen the sun in ages." "Tomorrow evening, we'll go out to dinner," Jim said. "There are some great places here, ribs, steak, seafood, you name it. I'll take you to a spot where the guys from work hang out so they can see how gorgeous my daughter is." The next evening, Jim and Emily sat at the rib joint and had a great time. "Why did you forgive me, Dad? I don't know if I would have if I were you. It was a huge mistake to help Mom with her infidelity. I hate myself for it, and I'm truly sorry." Jim replied, "I'm much happier with you around than without you. In that sense, I'm selfish. It makes me happy, and now it's become one of my life's goals." "I'm glad you feel that way. I hope you're always happy I'm here," Emily said sincerely. "We were always close, and I hated myself when I realized I pushed you away. Do you think you'll ever forgive Mom? She's not doing well without you. She's lost weight and rarely goes out. When rumors spread that Frank had an STD and that his partners needed testing, half the store employees were terrified. Frank seems to have gotten it from a new cashier, infecting a lot of people. Mom was the only manager on the list, which was awkward for her. Your mother and I agreed to be partners, Emily. Partners should be honest with each other. They need to trust each other," Jim admitted. "I don't trust her anymore. I understand, especially after meeting your harem at the pool today. It was awkward having so many women ask me about you. From the way they talked, I knew at least 4 were sleeping with you. My dad owns a condo," Emily smirked. "Seriously, they all think you're a sensitive, honest, attractive man who's pretty good in bed. I'm not sure about that. I have a few friends who visit now and then. I don't think they see me as anything special. It's more like I'm just available," Jim said modestly. "Mom made a huge mistake," Emily said. "Can I come here after I finish school and look for a summer job? I'm thinking about going to college nearby. Can I stay with you? Can I spend weekends and holidays with you? It's too far to commute to work, and Mom and I don't get along anymore. We're not close. Her betrayal hurt me more than I realized at the time." Jim eagerly agreed to Emily's request. He felt much happier spending time with his only child. He enjoyed watching her grow into a woman. They spoke several times a week after she returned from spring break. She insisted he not attend her graduation, but he promised to go to Florida the next day. On Sunday afternoon, Jim opened the door to greet Emily. When he saw Helen, he was stunned, unable to think or move for what felt like minutes, though it was only 10 or 15 seconds. He regained some composure. "Come on in, Helen. Can I get you a drink?" Jim asked automatically, trying to figure out why she was at his door. "Thanks, Jim. That would be great," Helen said. Jim followed them into the kitchen, poured them some iced tea, and sat down as Helen took her seat on the other side of the table. "I came to pick up Emily. She told me she's living here with you. I've changed jobs and moved to Dayton. We need to figure out what to do with the house," Helen explained. "You never filed for divorce, and we haven't spoken, so I'm not sure what you want to do." "What made you decide to move here?" Jim asked, surprised. "So what do you think will happen?" Helen joked. "I think I'll stop freezing every winter. With Emily in college in Florida, I have nothing to do there but gossip." I'm not sure what Emily told you, but your parents don't talk to me and mine aren't any better. I've let down a lot of people, including myself, but mostly you, Helen admitted. I can't ask for forgiveness because my actions were unforgivable. I'm looking for a fresh start where people won't mock me for having a pop. By the way, I'm glad I didn't pass it on to you. I think you'd stopped having sex with me by the time Frank gave me that gift. I'm responsible for what happened to us. I tried to blame you. Then there was Frank, the girl who infected him, even the man who wrote the letter. Frank went down. I realized it was all on me. I ruined my life and tried to ruin yours. If you hadn't found out, you would have appreciated Frank's little gift for me. I've come to regret what I did. I'm not sure how I thought it was normal at the time, like I was entitled to a fling. I even dragged Emily into this, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I nearly destroyed her relationship with her father because I was a selfish brat. I kept telling myself Frank was an idiot and this would end badly, Helen admitted, but I didn't listen. I'm so glad you welcomed her back into your life. Your love and approval mean the world to her. It meant a lot to me before I lost my way. Now that I don't have it, I'd do anything to get it back. I think we should make a list of things to sell and split the money. I assumed you had already filed for divorce. Isn't Frank single now? Jim asked pointedly. That's what I've heard. But if you mean do I care about that idiot, then no, I don't. I'm a fool, but not so much that I'd get Frank to divorce me, Helen replied. I thought you had already divorced me. I've given you plenty of reasons, Jim said. I'm pretty content with what I'm doing here. You know how much I hate change, and divorce can be pretty disruptive. We should discuss this now, shouldn't we? I guess so. If it's up to me, I'd like to stay married, but my past actions don't really support that, do they? I know you're too good a man to stay with a lying, cheating wife. I knew it all along, but I kept telling myself he'll never know. Where are you staying tonight? Helen asked. We've got time. We can talk about selling the house and everything else in the next week or two. I'm going to find a motel when I leave here. I noticed one near Highway 95. It's pretty close to Home Depot, Helen said, mentioning that she would start working there in a week. Emily went grocery shopping to give us some time to talk, but she'll be back soon, and I need to go. Emily's room has 2 single beds, Jim suggested. You could stay there if she doesn't mind. Won't that make you uncomfortable? I know I'm not her favorite person right now, and I deserve that. I'll be fine. If Emily doesn't mind, we'll ask her when she gets back, Jim replied. Emily didn't mind sharing a room with her mother for a while. Over the next few days, the 3 of them started falling back into the routines they had shared for years. Jim stayed away from the pool and the other women while Helen was living with him. He didn't want to hurt her. A few women came to the pool and asked, "When are you leaving?" Helen began one evening after Emily had gone to a concert. They always talk about your big bowl of rubbers and which ones they like best. It's actually pretty funny when you think about it. They stopped just short of telling me I ruined their Zek's lives. Have you really pleased 4 women, Jim? I'm impressed. Too bad I didn't make an impression on you before I met Frank, Helen added. Jim lost his temper. I'm not going to apologize for making these women happy. None of them are married, and they know I'm not looking for commitments. I try to give them as much pleasure as I can, and they enjoy it. How about some fun with me? Helen asked. No strings attached. I feel like I owe you for taking such good care of me after what I did to you. Jim insisted he wasn't the same guy she remembered. I'm more demanding and assertive now. I tell these women what I want, and they seem to like it. I never let them stay more than one night. So stay with me for one night. I can handle whatever you want to do. It will make me feel better about what I did, and I'll do my best to make you feel even better, Helen promised. Jim thought about her words for a few minutes before making a decision. 10 minutes later, they were unclothed on his bed. My God, Helen gasped, trying to catch her breath. That was amazing. You've learned some new tricks. Thanks, Jim. Helen was moving her clothes from Jim's room to Emily's when she heard Emily's voice. You two were loud enough. I'm glad you're done so I can get some sleep. Helen stayed with Emily and Jim during the summer. She slept on Emily's second bed and visited Jim often. She frequently told Jim he was the only man she'd ever be with. Jim just nodded in agreement. After the first night, Jim noticed Helen often counting the rubbers in the bowl. He realized she was trying to give him everything she had, keeping him from being with the other women in the building. Helen didn't like that her shift ended at 10 p.m. and Jim came home at 5. At least twice a week, she would come home to find fresh sheets on his bed and a couple of rubbers missing, since she had to leave for work at 2 p.m. She spent most of her mornings by the pool. The other women weren't mean to her. It was clear they all knew her marriage was on the brink and that she had caused the damage by cheating. Helen knew that when one of the women made a comment or asked a question, it was a hint. "Helen, did you pick out the new blue bedding for Jim's room?" Susan Struthers asked one morning. "It goes nicely with the curtains and carpet, doesn't it?" "Yes, Monica Barron, it's a lovely masculine color, and Jim is a very masculine man," Helen replied. "Jim, you don't want these women in your bed," Helen complained that night. "I'll give you as much Zex as you want. Aren't I enough for you?" "Exactly," Jim replied. "I won't see any of these women again." "Then why are there 2 rubbers missing from the bowl today? How does everyone know the color of your bedding?" Helen asked. "I honestly have no idea," Jim said with a smile.